"Fall back now, Sergeant. Direct order." The voice echoed over the radio, cold and firm, but she had already seen the shapes emerging through the snow. 4, 5, 10, then 20. And while command hesitated, the sniper held her breath and pulled the trigger. The dry wind cut through the firing range. At the far end of the line, a still silhouette breathed slowly, controlling her own pulse. With every exhale, the scope steadied. And for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Helena Cross, Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps, 33 years old. Recon sniper, advanced reconnaissance marksman. Her record held missions that would never appear in public reports. But inside the cold corridors of the base, everyone knew her name. Some out of respect, others out of fear. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Before every operation, she followed the same ritual. Adjusting the steel necklace around her neck, a small dented cross stained with age, and touching its center with her thumb. She said it reminded her of who she was before the uniform. Her father, an Air Force mechanic, had taught her to shoot when she was still a teenager. Not out of pride, but survival. "A good marksman doesn't kill, Lena," he used to say, his rural accent still thick. "A good marksman saves the ones no one else can reach." Those words followed her through every shot, every impossible decision. Inside the base, however, Helena never had the luxury of doubt. She was a woman in an elite platoon, and every mistake would be judged twice as hard. But what set her apart wasn't cold blood, it was instinct. She sensed danger before it took form. The wrong sound on the radio, a glint of light where there shouldn't be sun, signals invisible to everyone else. That made her valuable, and at the same time, unpredictable. Captain Miles Grant, a 20-year veteran of reconnaissance operations, saw in her a talent that challenged protocol. He respected her skills but feared her judgment. "Cross, you're too precise to waste it on impulse," he'd tell her during briefings. She would only nod in silence. She knew that in the field, theory died with the first shot. During the week of the Kashtal Mountain mission, tension filled the air. Satellites had detected rebel movement in northern villages, and rumors spread that civilians were being used as bargaining chips. Helena's unit, the 23rd Advanced Recon Platoon, was ordered to extract the hostages and ensure evacuation. It was labeled a medium-risk operation on paper, but nothing in that region was ever medium. The night before deployment, Helena disassembled and cleaned her M40A6 rifle piece by piece, as if tending to a sacred instrument. She checked the optics, the rangefinder, the precision magazine. Then she studied the holographic map, the routes, the blind spots, the bends of the valley. She knew that if anything went wrong, the sniper would see it first. And in that moment, without saying a word, Helena felt the weight of premonition settle in. At dawn, snow began to fall over the camp. She breathed in the cold air and zipped up her tactical vest. The radio crackled with hurried voices, helicopters being prepped, boots striking ice. Helena moved silently, rifle held close to her chest. When the commander approached for final orders, she replied with quiet resolve, "Sir, if I'm wrong, I'll fall back. But if I'm right, don't wait for orders to hold me back." Grant hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Just bring everyone home, Cross." Helena turned toward the helicopter that would take her into the Kashtal Mountains. The wind blew from the north, sweeping snow like white ash. And as the blades began to spin, she looked one last time at the cross. That morning, instinct had already made the choice for her. The helicopter cut across the low gray sky, slicing the wind between the mountains like a cold blade. Inside the cabin, silence weighed heavier than the sound of the rotors. Each Marine from the 23rd Advanced Reconnaissance Unit kept their eyes on the metal floor. Checking gear with disciplined quiet, Helena Cross, in the side seat, watched the narrow valley opening below through the hatch, a strip of ice, rock, and shadow. It was infiltration route Delta 9, a rescue zone marked as unstable. The plan was simple. Get in fast, extract the hostages, and get out before the enemy realized. But nothing in Helena's look trusted simple plans. When the helicopter touched down on the frozen ground, the cold hit her face like a blade. The thin air burned in her lungs. Helena checked the radio, adjusted her M40A6, and moved to an observation position on a hill to the north. From there, she would have a panoramic view of the village occupied by rebels. Her role was to provide visual and tactical cover for the ground team's advance, reporting any hostile movement. The clock read 09:42 when the platoon began the approach. Through the scope, Helena saw shadows moving among the abandoned huts. Women and children silent, faces smeared with fear. And among them, armed figures cloaked in grey mantles. Every movement was recorded with precision. Distance, wind, bearing, target position. Everything seemed as expected, until something broke the pattern. At the edge of the lens, a brief glint, like metal reflecting under the snow. Helena adjusted the focus, and she saw 6, 7, 10 men moving along the east flank, a route not listed on the reconnaissance reports. They weren't heading for the village. They were swinging around the valley, the exact path the platoon would take after the rescue. An ambush. Command: this is Cross. Hostile movement detected on the east sector, 30 degrees off the tactical map. Requesting authorization to alter overwatch. The reply came with static. Negative, Cross, no thermal signatures confirmed. Hold position. Over. Helena frowned and returned to the scope. The figures approached in a loose, silent formation, shielded by rock outcrops. Experience spoke louder. This wasn't a sensor error. It was death moving in silence. She tried contact again. Command: they're coming up from below the slope. Repeat, movement confirmed. Silence. Only the sound of the wind. Minutes later, the platoon began extracting the hostages. Children cried as soldiers slung them onto shoulders. And Helena watched everything from afar. Finger on the trigger. Heart caught between duty and instinct. The radio crackled again. All units begin withdrawal. Fall back now, Sergeant. Direct order. But on her sight, Helena already saw the inevitable. 10 figures had become 20. The enemy was closing the ring. She inhaled, adjusted the scope, gauged the wind. Copy, command, she answered, voice steady but eyes fixed on the lens. She thought, if I leave now, they won't make it out alive. On the other end, silence, and in that instant, time seemed to stop. Her finger moved on the trigger, as light as a whisper. Breath held, and the sound of the first shot rang through the mountains. The first shot split the valley like a muted thunderclap. The bullet traveled 800 meters in just over a second, striking the target in the chest before he could even lift his weapon. The body collapsed into the snow, and for an instant, everything fell silent again, a silence that hurt. Helena took a deep breath, refocused, and moved the scope 3 degrees to the right. Second target, another flash of metal. The wind came from the east, 6 knots, temperature dropping. She corrected half a mark on the scope, exhaled slowly, and fired again. Down in the valley, the platoon still didn't know what was happening. They only heard short, sharp echoes ricocheting through the mountains. Each echo was a warning. Someone wasn't going to get close to them. Helena moved among the rocks, every shift calculated with near mathematical precision. 30 seconds to collect shells, 40 to reposition, 10 to breathe. The radio hissed through the static. Cross, confirm status. She pressed the transmitter without taking her eye off the scope. Visual contact with multiple hostiles. Cover maintained. Continue withdrawal. Command hesitated to reply. At that point, orders no longer mattered. Helena was on another frequency, the frequency of survival. A burst of machine gun fire swept across the ridge where she was hidden. Shards of stone flew, cutting her face. She ducked, swapped magazines, and crawled to a new natural cover. Blood ran down her cheek, but her eyes stayed calm. The snow began to fall thicker, reducing visibility, an advantage for her. The camouflage confused the enemy. She covered the rifle and waited. When the first figure appeared on the opposite cliff, she didn't aim for the body. She aimed for the rock just above. The shot cracked the stone, and the fragments sent 2 men tumbling down at once. Intelligence, not brute force. The radio crackled again. Cross evac in 2 minutes, extraction point northeast. She looked over the valley one last time. Below, the silhouettes of her comrades were retreating, shielding the civilians. The helicopter appeared in the distance, a shadow carved into the fog. They still had 150 meters to the open ridge, and behind them the enemy was regrouping. Helena inhaled, steadied the rifle, and adjusted the scope for long distance. You've got 120 seconds. Make them count. 3 shots, 3 echoes, 3 enemies down. A grenade exploded too close. Shrapnel tore through her vest and ripped her shoulder open. She fell on her back, gasping. The world spun, but her hand never let go of the rifle. She clenched her teeth, rolled to the side, and got back into position. Her vision blurred for a moment. The sound of her heartbeat drowned the wind. Even so, she managed to line up one last target, a rebel raising a rocket launcher. Helena locked her gaze, drew in what little breath she had left, and fired. The impact detonated the projectile before it could launch. An explosion lit up the valley. The helicopter rose, climbing with the platoon safe aboard. Helena smiled for a second, exhausted. Smoke rose, blending with the snow. Mission accomplished. Then the silence returned, a silence that seemed to honor what had just happened. The helicopter vanished over the horizon with the platoon safe aboard. On the ground between the snow and the stench of gunpowder, Helena remained still for long minutes, watching the snow fall. The sound of the rotor blades faded into the distance, until only the wind cutting through the mountains remained. Her shoulder throbbed. Blood seeped through her uniform and her breathing came shallow, painful. Yet there was something deeper than pain, a strange calm, almost solemn. The mission was complete, but the cost would still be measured. Hours later, a rescue team located the contact point. Helena was conscious, though half buried in snow. Her rifle, clean, resting beside her, looked as if it were still on guard. The medical report read, "Shrapnel wounds to the shoulder and left leg, signs of severe hypothermia, consciousness preserved." But in the mission report, the section reserved for the description of events was left blank. Not a single line. No official record of what had truly happened on that mountain. Back at the base, the hallways were as cold and impersonal as ever. Footsteps echoed, blending with the constant hum of fluorescent lights. Helena walked with her arm in a sling, eyes fixed straight ahead. People went silent as she passed, part respect, part fear. There was something in her gaze, something that carried the reflection of a battlefield. She was taken directly to the tactical interrogation room. A high-ranking officer waited, a thick file on the table. No greetings, no prolonged looks, just the detached demeanor of someone who measures lives in numbers. "Sergeant Cross, the report on the Karstol operation is incomplete." Helena said nothing. "We need details. How many hostiles neutralized? What were the extraction coordinates? Was there any external interference?" She raised her eyes. "There were no numbers on that mountain, sir. Only choices." The officer narrowed his eyes. "You disobeyed direct orders, Sergeant. You stayed behind." A brief silence. Then her voice, unsteady, unshaken. "If I hadn't, they'd all be dead." The officer's pen froze mid-air. He drew in a slow breath, then closed the file. This conversation never happened, and so the story of Karstol vanished from the records, like so many others the army preferred to forget. Helena was quietly reassigned. No medals, no mentions in public reports. Just a new designation and a sterile note in the system. Operational aptitude restricted. Emotional instability, under observation. In the days that followed, she spent hours at the shooting range, firing alone and repeating the same movement, the same breath, as if trying to recover something the war had taken. Each shot sounded more distant, more hollow. Her aim remained flawless, but her eyes no longer searched for targets. At night in the barracks, the wind would slip through the cracks of the window, and Helena swore she could still hear the echo of the shots that had saved the platoon. The sound came and went, reminding her that some victories are never celebrated, and some wounds never bleed on the outside. The report was never written. But among the soldiers, a story began to circulate, whispered, never confirmed, the tale of the sniper who stayed behind to save the others. And that's how the name Helena Cross began to slip off the records and into legend. Months passed, and life went on as if nothing had ever happened. New missions were launched, new names filled the reports, and the mountain ice once again buried the traces of war. But there, at the exact spot where Helena Cross had fired her last shot, the wind still sounded different, as if it carried a memory time refused to erase. Helena was reassigned to a training base in the north, far from any combat zones. None of the recruits knew who she was. They only called her the instructor. Strict, precise, methodical. She corrected postures, adjusted sights, reviewed protocols. But sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the shooting range fell silent, she would walk to the edge of the hill and stare at the horizon in silence. The chill of the mountains still followed her, invisible but constant. One afternoon, a young cadet approached. She had the same spark in her eyes that Helena once carried years ago. "Sergeant, is it true what they say, that a woman held the line alone in Kashtal?" Helena was silent for a moment. Then, without taking her eyes off the horizon, she simply replied, "Some stories don't need to be told, only remembered." The cadet nodded and walked away, but the answer echoed in her heart, and from it a new rumor was born, a new legend. That night, Helena opened the metal locker beside her bed. Inside, she kept only 3 things: a necklace with a bullet pendant rusted with time, a worn pair of shooting gloves, and an old photograph, her platoon, and the stitched insignia on their uniforms, Recon Advanced Unit. For a brief moment, she ran her fingers over the smiling faces in the photo, and something shimmered in her eyes, a mixture of longing and peace. When the wind drifted through the window, she recognized it. It was the same sound she had heard in the snow, the same that once swept through the mountains. She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath, feeling both the weight of time and the lightness of having fulfilled her duty, even if the world would never know. Days later, Command received a request for permanent discharge. No reason listed, only a simple signature, Helena Cross. But before she left, she wrote something on the wall above the shooting range, a line in black ink, scrawled just above the target silhouettes. "Courage isn't firing first. It's staying when everyone else says to fall back." No one knew where she went after that. Some said she returned to the north. Others swore she joined humanitarian operations in conflict zones. What's known is that years later, a rescue team intercepted a female voice on the radio. Calm, steady, familiar. "Hold your position. I see you." And for a brief second, between the sound of the snow and the static of the transmitter, someone swore they heard the same name again, Cross. Since then, in the mountains of Kashtal, soldiers say that when the wind shifts and silence falls heavy, it's because she's near. Not as a ghost, but as a living memory of courage, the kind that never appears in reports but changes the fate of those who survive.